This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Eric Hanchett, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not. This episode is brought to you by Talk Python Training. The Self-Taught or Not podcast is all about leveling up your career in the tech space and learning software development the right way. Python is one of the hottest languages at the moment, and you don't need a CS degree to be part of this excitement. Our friends over at Talk Python Training have nearly 200 hours of professional-grade online Python courses. If you want to learn Python for about the price of a book on your own, just visit talkpython.fm/self-taught to find your next level. That's talkpython.fm/self-taught. It'll also be in our show notes at selftaughtornot.com. Thanks. Hey, everybody. Today we are talking about mentorship. We're going to talk a little bit about how you get spun up, how you get started in a new job, some tips for that. So it's going to be a little bit of a smorgasbord episode, but I think this is fun. These are topics that we're both passionate about, me and Dylan, and things that we've seen in the industry and things that can make you a better developer. So how's it going, Dylan?
Life is good, man. I got no complaints. It's a nice lazy Sunday as we go and record this. Nothing but good vibes, as the kids say.
Yeah, for sure. For those of you who listened to last week's episode, we actually had recorded that I think it was in January. It might have been December. I think it was really a while ago. And now we are recording this on Sunday right before it goes out. So you are hearing very close to live recording.
Bill O'Reilly style. We're doing it live.
Bill O'Reilly, we'll do it. We're doing it live. Exactly. We're doing it live. That's cool. All right. So let's just jump into the topic. I'm doing okay too. We're here in Reno, Nevada. We had some snow. I'm lucky not to be in Texas or anywhere else that has this crazy snowstorm that happened last week. I know. Did you get affected by that at all? I mean, probably not in Florida.
Dude, it was a whopping 70. It was freezing.
It's funny. I have some coworkers and some friends in Austin, and my dad lives there. And it was crazy. Everything from having to boil his water. Now they're in a boil water. At least I think it was through last Friday. And then people were doing filling their bathtubs full of water. So that way they had water for toilets and other things because everybody was afraid that the water was going to be shut off. And, just people going to the store and just buying as much bottled water and food as they can. And then stores are running out of food. People are all on pretty much a full on panic mode, I think, for a few days there, especially when, the power was out for so many people. And now I think it's gotten much better since last Thursday or Wednesday of last week. So things are starting to get back to normal. But that's pretty scary, man. I never take for granted having power or running water.
Yeah, man. I mean, if not just for purely survival reasons, cleanliness and boredom. I don't, honest to God, wouldn't even know what to do in my house if I didn't have internet or power. It's just a box at that point. That's cold. It's a cold, dark box, and that sounds very much like prison.
Yeah. I think that's some of how it was in Austin for some people. And people were missing stand-ups and couldn't get internet working. And yeah, but I'm glad things are doing a little bit better there. And Reno, the worst we get is we get some snow, but we've never had that crazy power problems. Anyways, yeah, let's jump into the mentorship, which is a good topic because I fully admit that I've always wanted to have a mentor, and we've talked in the past about virtual mentors, but I don't think at least I don't think we've talked in depth about mentorship. So I think this is a good topic to talk about. I'll jump in first before Dylan goes, just with my experience with mentorship. At one of my jobs a few jobs ago, I was going back to get my MBA, and I had met another person that was a senior manager at the company I was working at, and he had just finished his MBA. So, me being a person that wanted to connect with a lot of people, I messaged him on my internal Slack in our company and said, "Hey, I just heard you graduated," because my professor literally had mentioned them during one of the classes. And I said, "Hey, can we have lunch?" So we went and we got lunch, and he talked all about how he went up from, he was a developer and he moved his way up into being a manager. And he gave me some tips and tricks of like some things I could do in the organization. But then when we started talking more, we had like nothing in common. He was this crazy, not crazy, but he was really into cars, and he was really into a lot of things that I wasn't into. So we like the topics weren't flowing as well as I thought, and we weren't like connecting as much. And then after the one time I had lunch with him, I never really reached out to him again. I think I emailed him and thanked him for the advice he gave me. But I think that goes to the point that if I really wanted to be serious about a mentor, I probably should have like followed up with him several times and kept it going. And instead, we just kind of lost touch after that first time. So that is pretty much my only experience with like a formal mentorship. I definitely have had some informal mentors. I think, I listen to a lot of podcasts like the syntax.fm, which has Wes Boss and Scott Talinsky, and those guys are amazing. There's a lot of really, really great developers on Twitter that I follow all the time. I think I even mentioned in a few videos. And there's some amazing podcasts that I follow, and I really look up to the people on there, like the Ladybug podcast. But I don't have like a formal mentorship model, and I haven't been on too many companies that have that. So, yeah, what's your experience been like, Dylan?
Yeah, so I would say the first thing I think to bring up is that mentoring doesn't have to be ongoing for huge extended periods of time. Oftentimes, there are people who get mentoring from me that are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions to get what they need or what they're looking for out of a mentor. Because maybe the value that I can provide is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sessions, and that's okay. Or what it is that you're looking for from that person. So I don't, I want some people to consider that, if you're looking to get one thing and you get it, it's okay to move on to other mentors. It doesn't mean that it was a failure or anything like that. It served its purpose. I've been a big proponent of it, and I account for a good portion of my early success in my career to a mentor that it wasn't like, oh, hey, be my mentor or anything like that. Like when you're in like high school, like, will you be my girlfriend or whatever? But yeah, and more or less all I really consider a mentor is someone to provide me wisdom and knowledge and me to put energy and direction behind it. Like, it doesn't matter if I'm the most energetic, hardworking dev if I'm working in the wrong direction. And it's one of the ways that I think has really helped my career grow, and very rapidly and early on in my career as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of like two different topics here. It's almost like you have mentee because you've mentored people. You've people have paid you and you've mentored them, so you've been the mentor, and then you've been the mentee as well. So it feels like, yeah, two different ways of going at it. I have definitely offered, I don't know if it's mentoring, but I've definitely offered like consulting in the past, which is sort of a mentorship, but sort of not. I've kind of moved between those two, and it's kind of gets gray though, a gray area, because you think of a mentor as someone that can help lead you, can answer questions for you, and then a contractor or freelancer is more someone that's going to like just do the work for you. So I guess there definitely is a difference there, and I've seen sometimes where I've talked to people and I've gone from like, hey, I'm going to give you questions and answers to like, could you just do this for me? And I definitely like the idea of helping people, pointing them into the right direction rather than like actually doing the work for them. And I also like what you said about it's okay if it's just a one-time thing. So maybe that's the way I should think about that when I was talking to, my quote unquote mentor at a few jobs ago. Like, even though we only met once, it definitely did help me out, and it definitely helped me point me in the right direction of what I could do at the company I was at. So I like that. I like that idea as well. I mean, you can kind of approach it both ways. And it doesn't have to be this really awkward thing where you have to go and ask somebody, like a date, like you're in high school, can you be my mentor? It can be something where you build a relationship with somebody and you just ask them questions. Like, sometimes I ask Dylan questions. Just today, right before we got into recording, I was asking him some questions and some advice. So that happens both ways. So I definitely like that idea of just helping person out. It doesn't have to be an official formal thing. And I also say too is that if you are looking for a mentor, there is quite a few websites. There's If you just Google like front end mentor, there's frontendmentor.io. I think I saw the other day. There's a whole website where people can post their name and information and email address. And if you want to contact them, you can actually have them mentor you. And some of them cost money and some of them are free. So there is a bunch of services out there that kind of help specifically developers like find people and help get mentors from them. I would say most of the really big people in the industry, like I was mentioning before, of Syntax.fm and Wes Boss and Scott Talinsky, like those guys, I don't think they would never have enough time to like mentor a person like me, but I could listen to them and understand what they're doing and try to take mentorship that way as well. And I think a lot of bigger tech influencers, I'm putting up air quotes here with my hands, are really busy too, and I doubt you can really get help from them. I mean, unless you pay a lot of money.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a substantial amount of money. I mean, maybe if you go for the top of the top people, right? Like one of the sites that I use to provide mentoring for people who want that one-on-one is Mentor Cruise. So, we've both been messaged, I'm sure, by a million sites like this that, hey, create accounts. This is one I actually liked, and I've been mentoring a few people, and it's like $240 a month for my mentorship, where we meet up 30 minutes every week and messaging back and forth. So not cheap, but not going to break the bank if it's something that you're really looking to go for and sort of land that job or upskill or do a code review and all that sort of stuff. um, you know and a good thing is that there's so much free mentoring out there through like freemium content, podcasts, YouTube channels, that really the reason you pay is if you want individual sort of responses. You can get more of a general mentoring um, in the process that for pretty much nothing.
Codingcoach.io is another really good mentoring site. I haven't used it, but I've heard Emma Bostian talk about it. So it's there's these really great sites that can help you with mentoring. So what I'm gonna ask you, because I haven't done this, I should do it. What are some things you look for in a mentor? So I'm assuming like you would need to find someone that's a higher level than you. I mean, higher level as in either has the skills that you're looking to learn, is in the job that you want to be at, is at the level at a company that you want to strive for. Is that sort of what you look for in a mentor, or do you look for something else?
Yeah, and to that point, I think I encourage everyone to be on both sides, be both the mentor and the mentee, because all a mentor really has to be is have something or have achieved something that you want to achieve. That's how I look at it. Whether it is, hey, how come we're at the same level and you make 50% more than I do? Or, hey, how come, how'd you get into the FANG company? Or, hey, how'd you become a senior? Hey, so I look at mentors that are one level where I want to be. Because I think if you get too ahead of yourself, I think at some point I will be a director or a manager or something like that. I don't know why I would be getting mentored by a manager or director. I want people who were in the position I was in recently, freshly, last couple of years. And to do that, it's 1 year. So that's one thing, or one sort of skip, right? One level. And I think that's something to keep in mind because it's fresh at how they did it. And so that's usually what I look for.
Yeah. What can you do to get a mentor without paying for one? Like, what could you offer them?
I mean, a lot of it is if so. Let's say you're already you started your work experience. There are people around you that can mentor you, especially early on in your career, because chances are you're not going to be the top of the food chain for a very long time, for a very long time, and most of your colleagues, if you say, "Hey, man, can I set up a 30-minute meeting with you once every, you know, 2 weeks?" You do that with two of your colleagues. You're getting an hour of mentoring of, senior professionals, and most are going to do it because it makes them look good. As you go and one thing to keep in mind as an individual contributor, um, a non-manager position, right? Especially as you go and you progress your career, it's not about what you do anymore. And this is kind of a hard thing to grasp when you are a sort of low-level individual contributor, junior or mid-level engineer. It is about your impact on the overall team and raising people up. The only way that companies can justify paying ridiculous $500,000 to $1 million salaries at some of these higher level positions where you're still technically not a manager is because you raise up the individual contributors around you, and by them raising you up, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to. It makes them look good. You just have to ask, and if you get shot down, ask somebody else.
I like that. It reminds me of. So I know you're not a huge sports fan or football fan, but for those who are, Tom Brady was just in the Super Bowl, and he went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and that team has not been the greatest team in the last 10 years. Like, they haven't been in the Super Bowl for a long time, and they had a lot of losing seasons. But it seems like you could take, this is an extreme example, but one really good person, really good football player, one really good developer who can just lift everybody else up in your organization or your team. So if that is a great incentive for people to really work with junior developers, or work not even junior developers or new developers on a team and help them out. And it should be, really up to you to really seek out those people, or seek out the people that just are really rock stars, or are really good at their jobs, and to talk to them in your company so they can help raise you up. So, it happens. And then if you do that correctly, you might win the Super Bowl, just like Tom Brady for 7 times. Right? That can happen.
Sports. Sports.
What would be the equivalent in software development? Like, we shipped a feature before it was due, and we all got extra few days of pat on our backs, and I don't know.
Yeah,
Everybody's doing really great.
I think you see this a lot with tech leads. I think mentoring is built in as a technical lead, where a lot of times as you go and work at larger organizations, your tech leads will actually jump between teams. They'll go a place for 6 months to a year, get everything, ramp up the people, get them going, set up the processes, the architecture, all that sort of stuff, and then boom, move on to the next one and to the next one. And that's a form of mentoring as well. So,
And I think what about, and we'll move on from this topic. I just want to put a pin in it. But if you can be a mentee and find a mentor, but you can be a mentor at the same time, I suppose. I mean, depending on professionally in your team, you may be a couple of levels up behind, maybe a level up for someone that just started versus someone that's been there for a long time, and you could still kind of help people around you even while you're learning. I mean, it depends on your comfort level and how far along you are in the job or the place you work, but you could definitely do both, or you could do it outside of work, I guess.
absolutely. And don't think it can't be a two-way street either. There have been plenty of people I've mentored who have been more advanced in their career, just not in the things that I have been advanced in. And I've been able to coach them as they have coached me in certain items. And so it doesn't have to be this one-way street. And I think sometimes that's a lot of people's fear, is that they just feel like they're taking. And it's not really that. It's more like they are giving back. And you can oftentimes give something back as well. Not all the time, but most of the time.
Yeah, I like that. Let's talk about getting up and running at a new job. We've been kind of hinting at it, and this, I think, dovetails nicely with this topic of mentorship, because I think one thing we think of getting mentors, especially professionally in our jobs, is when we start a new job. and I've been thinking about this, but what are some things you can do at a new job beyond, finding a mentor to get you spun up quickly? And I'll throw one out here. Maybe we can go back and forth between me and Dylan, and I'm sure Dylan has some ideas too. But I like to ask questions and escalate problems early. So, kind of at the beginning of a new job, you have to kind of ask a lot of questions, and a lot of them will probably be dumb questions, honestly, and that's okay because you're trying to get ramp up, you're trying to understand everything. But you also don't want to kind of be spinning your wheels for too long, because probably at the job you're in, there's going to be so many things you need to learn right away that don't feel like you can't ask questions. Don't feel like you can ask questions. Now, there's going to be some circumstance involved in this in some companies. If you're hired as a ultra level senior developer and you are taking over a team, you probably not going to probably wouldn't be looking if you asked a bunch of really silly questions. But if you're in a brand new organization and they have this process you've never seen before, or these tools you've never seen before, I think it's okay to go out there and ask a lot of questions. And then I would also say, write everything down. I have been looking at this tool like Notion and Obsidian, which are kind of like note-taking apps, and just trying to make notes of everything you learn along the way. And then just try to deep dive into that and make sure it's searchable too, because that way it does two things when you take notes. First, it's like you're back in school. When you write things down, you're more likely to remember it. And second, it's going to be a nice reference that you can go back to and search for these questions later on that you've forgotten. So I think those two things are the first things I'm thinking about as to get spun up at a new job.
Yeah. I would say for me, and this is something I'm dealing with currently, is setting practical expectations. As you go and you move to new teams, you're new. It's gonna take you a while to ramp up, and especially one thing for me is I feel like I'm ramping up slower than in the past. But I'm also working in newer technologies, new team, more advanced projects, all that sort of stuff. Getting accustomed to the culture, and so I think there's a mentality shift that's super important. And this is something by all means I'm not great at it as well, as sort of getting there, but really understanding. And this goes back to even when learning code, setting realistic expectations that you're not going to learn to code in 6 weeks, much like you're not going to get ramped up in 6 weeks. Typically, it might take longer than that. But just understand that some of the times these things take time and it's going to be frustrating, but you'll get there. And that's a scary thing because a lot of people, especially early on in your career, you're like, dude, I'm just trying not to get fired. I'm trying to keep my job. Later on in your career, you get laid off, whatever, you'll get picked up by another company next week. Not that you should make that your goal, but you'll be all right. That's what I'm trying to say. That first junior dev job is it's going to feel like make or break, though.
I remember one of my first jobs, I was working basically working with these slot machines, like these gambling machines. And if you've never been in this industry of gaming, we call it, not gaming as video games, but gaming as in gambling, there's a lot of nuances. There's a lot of just acronyms. You have no idea what all these acronyms are and it's kind of, I remember my first job just feeling a little bit overwhelmed on that. But I remember just taking a notebook, and we had a wiki, and just writing everything I learned down in the wiki every day. And then I found that someone in even two departments over had created a document with all the different acronyms, and there was literally 30 pages of acronyms. So I was able to just use that and search that all the time, because I'd be in meetings and people be like, well, the SDS system went down the other day because this coin in coin out were wrong, and the plays on it, and the whole game tilted, and it sent a jackpot up. And I'm like, what does this mean? It was a different language. And so just writing everything down, trying to remember what all these acronyms are, talking to people, finding out, asking a lot of questions, getting this document to just start putting it all together, that really helped too. And then every code base, I would say, at any new job is going to be a challenge, unless you're in a greenfield project and there's nothing, which If you are, you're very lucky because that's probably not how most companies work unless you get into some brand new startup. I was lucky in my at a previous job where I actually started with a blank slate and we actually created the app from scratch and we just had to keep adding stuff in. We actually used a template, so not completely from scratch, but most of the time you're going to start with a pretty complicated code base. And a lot of these companies have been using these code bases for months, if not years, most of the time years, and they're going to have some warts in them and they're going to be some bright spots too that look really awesome, and you just have to kind of dive into that code base. Do you have any tips, Dylan? Like if you're starting a new job and you need to jump into a code base, like how do you learn it? Like what should you do?
I just start building features is the best tip I can give you. I have tried all the things. I have tried going through the project, reviewing it. I have tried getting rundowns from other developers. That helps a little bit, so they can kind of tell you which parts are all right, which parts to stay away from. They can kind of tell you the overall architecture. But as scary and frustrating as it is, I think it's very much so just like you have to bang your head against the code for a while, and like eventually it starts to make sense. I will say I think it's easier doing new features even on an older project than it is to do bug fixes. I think bug fixes really do require some very intimate knowledge to have an idea of what's wrong with the application. And like I've been on apps where like someone will mention a bug that I've been working on for a year, or not the bug but the project, and I already know what the bug is. I was like, okay, I know exactly what this is. Meanwhile, a newer developer might take them 2 weeks to figure out what the root cause is because they have no idea what's even going on in the code.
Yeah, that I think diving in and creating features, bug fixes are definitely a great way to learn. What do you think about looking through pull requests and tickets and trying to read through those? Is that hit and miss, or you think that's helpful? Or
uh it really depends on the project because you can have so many repos at the end of the day where like depending on the size of the project too. If you're like a 2, 3, 4 person team, fine. But what happens if you have sister teams? What happens if you have 10 people on your team and then 3 other teams with 10 people? You can't look through the pull requests all day of the week. It's going to be too sporadic because there's going to be too many things going on. But I don't know. I really just think getting going is all about just jumping in and sort of sink or swim. And if you put the time in, you'll swim. But I I haven't found a better way. So I mean I'm open to it. I'm not saying it's the best way. It's just the best way I know how quite yet.
yeah, I understand there. I mean, it depends on the place you work at, but you might be lucky, and they might have really great documentation for whatever app you're building. Like someone may have in the past created a wiki with a bunch of information. But in my experience, that doesn't happen too often because apps change so often and no one's responsible for updating the wiki when this class changes to this or we delete this, or so the guides have to be pretty broad. But it also depends on, in some organizations, just you may not get a guide to the code, but you may get a guide to how it works. And usually if it's a facing app, a public facing app or utility, there's probably going to be good documentation of how it works, but not necessarily like the code inside of it. Or if it doesn't have any documentation, it might be really simple to walk through it. Like it's an app that's public facing that they have to enter some information in, like a CRUD type app. Like you don't really need documentation for that because most people just understand it who goes to it. But if it's complicated, like it's a utility or library or something, there's probably documentation for that. Have you seen any documentation help in some jobs and not others?
I mean kind of more or less the idea of, hey, here's the general flow of the app. Documentation is hard to keep up to date, just by the nature of our job. Our job is about iterating and building and fixing and changing and refactoring, and just it's a constant state of change, for better or for worse. And unless you are willing to update the documentation in that constant flow, I don't think there is a lot of you're not gonna have a lot of documentation. It's gonna be very detail oriented. It's gonna be very high level, so it doesn't get out to date. Even that sometimes does. So I haven't really had the experience of that yet. I think it's kind of a myth, to be honest.
Another thing,
I don't, I don't know.
the documentation
Yeah,
myth.
I think documentation is kind of a myth. But maybe it's just been my experience.
I think you're right. I don't think I remember too many places that had
This is like
like amazing, like at least developer focused documentation.
my buddy when he's salty and he gets rejected, like he's like, "Yo, man, they're just looking for that chip and tail doctor." It's like you can't have both, man. It's just like the perfect code base. It doesn't exist, right? Like it's just not how it goes.
Another thing that I just thought of with not with mentoring, but we're talking about getting spun up in a new job. And I guess this is sort of like mentoring, is to do pair programming. So if you can be paired with somebody up at a new job, and if you're not, just request it, and just make sure everybody understands that if you're taking up their time, they're probably not going to be able to get everything done they normally get done because now they're working with you. But if you can pair with someone like a couple hours a day or a week or whatever time they have, I think that's immensely helpful. And not just pairing on nothing, but pairing on an actual like ticket, like either a bug fix or feature or something where you can kind of see, or maybe just them showing you the code base at first, but making sure you have some kind of objective that can be really helpful to get spun up quicker at a job, because then you can see their workflow, how they do it, how they're handling different errors. And it may not solve every scenario, but it could at least get your mind thinking and help you out.
Yeah, I think people don't make use of pair programming as much as they should, and I personally like it quite a bit, but not all devs are accustomed to it, and digitally it's a little harder if we're being honest, and a lot of us are working digitally. I've been reaching out, and I've been at my current work for about 2 months now, and I would say about once a day I'm pairing with somebody for about 30, 45 minutes, or two people where I get stuck, and instead of spending 8 hours being stuck, I'm figuring out like, hey man, can you hop on a call with me? Let me tell you what I got. Let me tell you what's going on, and let me tell you what I think the problem is. Um, and it's been very helpful, and to the point of like, hey, how can you ramp up differently if you're in a different time zone than your team and you're working digitally like I am. I have shifted my schedule to work at like a 10 to 7 shift, so I have more overlap with my teammates on the West Coast. So things like that, depending on your environment, can help as well.
Oh yeah, that's a really good tip. Just make sure that you are available the same time most of your team is available, because it is become more difficult if you're the only developer working and you run into a problem and it's 3:30 your time, but everybody's gone home because everybody else is on the East Coast, or vice versa. You're working at 8 o'clock your time, but it's 5 o'clock everywhere else, and everybody's asleep because it's 5 a.m. So yeah, that's a pretty good tip too. Let me see, what else. Do you have any other tips for getting spun up at a new job?
I mean, I think you kind of talked about not being afraid to ask questions. I will be asked so many questions until I have someone tell me to shut up. I I was asking one developer recently so many questions. He started asking me to put time on his calendar. I was like, "All right, dude, I got you." And I've had this happen at other workplaces where, and it's not like it's sort of the curse of knowledge. It's not like I'm trying to be disrespectful of their time, but once you're on a team for a while, you kind of start seeing not necessarily who's leading the team, but who has the knowledge of the product. And it's not everybody. Like people have different knowledge sets. Um, and you know, you go back to the knowledge well, eventually the well runs dry. And so you gotta kind of spread it out a little bit. So that'd be something I think I need to do better. Where if you can start, when you're asking questions, try and spread it out so you're not taking up one person's entire time.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, are you a senior developer that's been doing this for many years? Are you a junior developer that's coming out of college? And how how much more effort you need to get up and running. I think no matter what level, you should be asking questions. Doesn't matter if you're a senior level or you're a junior level, you probably should be asking questions just to understand the code base and help you when you get stuck. But there probably is some expectations that higher you are up in the food chain or more senior you get, that you should still always ask questions, but you should also do a lot to figure out the answers yourself. And I think that also depends on time you've been at a job. So the first few months, you're probably gonna be asking more questions, but as you kind of ramp up and you've been there for a longer period of time, the expectation, as I just dropped something, oops, your expectation is probably you're not going to be asking so many questions. But I don't think you need to worry about that. So when you first start a new job, you should be fine with asking questions and keep moving forward and be okay with mistakes too, because you are going to make mistakes at any new job. But that's why luckily we're at we're in a industry that has pretty good rail guards against people messing up. So we have code reviews that everybody's gonna be checking your code. There's testing, we have integration systems that run tests every time you push pull requests up. We have manual testers. Sometimes we have QA teams. Yeah, so you have a lot of safety, a lot of safety belts. That makes sense along the way to make sure that you can't do something that'll break down production. And if you are in a company that doesn't have that in place and you're a junior dev and you accidentally drop all the tables in your production database, I think the fault lies more with the company you're in than you yourself, because that shouldn't happen.
Yeah,
I,
that's
I saw that on
100.
Stack Overflow once.
Yeah, it's
Go ahead.
100%. You, I mean, if your company's giving you a feature, a must deliver feature that is complex and has to go out your first couple tickets, that ain't on you. that's that's like giving the 10-year-old the keys to the car and saying go drive, baby girl. Like it's uh it's not a good decision. Like it might work out, but it might not also. So not you know hopefully that's not the case. And it's I think I think one thing to keep in mind is that depending on what sort of organization you go to, the expectations for how quickly you're going to get ramped up is going to be very different. Like I think as I've progressed in my career, the ramp up time at less established companies was much less because the products were oftentimes less complicated and they often weren't fully technical individuals that understood the complexity of actually writing software. And then as I've worked at more tech related companies and larger companies, they've been more generous in that regard. Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting thinking back about some of these smaller companies I've worked at where like it's almost there's just so little understanding of what it takes to write software that it's almost disrespectful. We're just the expensive employee in their eyes.
I think that's pretty much it. I do have one more question. I'll throw this out to you, Dylan, kind of related to, since you had mentioned working remotely. I think a lot of us are still working remotely right now, and some of us will be going back into the offices, some of us won't. Is there any tips like setting up your workspace for new employees? Like when you start a new job, what should you do to be the most productive you can at home?
Yeah, so a couple things that I'd recommend that are like hardware related. I highly recommend the wireless headphones. I really think that's something nice, especially when you're working remote. You don't always need to be at your computer. Being able to be in a meeting with wireless headphones and then walking to get a cup of water or whatever is something that I think is kind of nice, and it's one of the it's taking full advantage of sort of the remote life and it'll do well in the office as well. Another thing is if you don't have a second monitor, I encourage you to have a second monitor, and maybe even a third, a stand-up desk, all that sort of stuff. But sort of a separated work area. Don't be that guy working in bed because that's not where you should be working. Have your own work desk. Like I have my sort of play desk that we're talking at now and then I have a separate desk that I go and work at. And I haven't always had it that way. I've actually run out a little bit of computer space here, but I have a separate office, so it's sort of separated out that way. But I think really just making sure you're set up to succeed, and most organizations will actually refund you or buy some of these things. Maybe not a standing desk, but usually the other stuff.
Yeah, I think being able to find a nice quiet place in your house. I've done that before though. I've taken my laptop and just like laid down in my bed and just type it out, and then someone's like, "Can we turn on your camera?" I'm like, "Oh, okay." They have to go run to your room or something, because I'm like, I don't want to be that weird guy that's laying in bed with the camera on, coding. But
Not a good look. It's a good way to lose your job, I think.
but sometimes like I've had people with like bad back problems or something that had to lay down, or they just needed to get out of the place. I luckily before COVID, one of the recommendations a lot of people have is just take your laptop, like get out of your office and just go to a co-working space or a Starbucks or a coffee shop of some kind. So that way you can just get out of that office, and that might be a nice way to increase your productivity. But I feel like right now it's a little harder. I actually used to work at a place that was right next to a lake, like a little more like a pond, I suppose. And it was surrounded by residential areas around it. And every day this guy would come out with his blanket, and he would throw his blanket on the grass that was surrounding the pond, and he would whip out his laptop, and he had like one of those wireless adapters for Verizon or something, and he'd be working, and then he would like take off his shoes, and we would be walking around the lake because it had a little walking thing around it, and we would see him working, and we always thought it was kind of weird, but I guess it worked for him. And then one day someone came up and tried to steal his laptop, and like there was police around everywhere, and like I guess the guy got the laptop when he wasn't looking, and ran away with it. And then that was the last time we saw him around the lake, sitting with his laptop working. So maybe be careful when you work outside. I don't know. That was my story of the podcast.
I guess we'll end it on that.
All right. Okay. If you are listening right now and you have not gone onto iTunes and given us a 5-star review and wrote a review, please do so. We actually have quite a few reviews. I think 30 or 40. Most of them are 5 stars, and we only have a handful of actual comments. So leave a comment. I leave a little note of it. That'd be awesome, especially if you made it all the way to the end and enjoyed it. All right. Take care. Peace.
Till next. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at eric.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members, and you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.